The night I met George Foreman. Charlie Shipes was the #1 welterweight contender, and he lived in the Oakland, California area. We had him fighting the main event at Oakland Municipal Auditorium. And as a special feature on the card, we had this young man who was a member of the Job Corps in Pleasanton, California, which was about 30 miles from Oakland, by the name of George Foreman. He was 18 years old. He had 6 amateur fights. In other words, he was green as grass. He was actually a street fighter from the 5th Ward in Houston, which is the very rough part of town. And George had never lost a street fight. Well, he was getting into fights at the in Pleasanton, and he was on the verge of being kicked out of the Job Corps, which was a President Lyndon Johnson project. The boxing trainer by the name of Doc Brodus got a hold of George and he said, "Listen, young man," he says, "I see you like to fight and you're certainly very capable. You come to my boxing program and you can dispense all the energy in the gymnasium, and that way it'll be legal and you won't get kicked out of the Job Corps." So George did it, this 18-year-old kid out of Houston in Pleasanton, California. He had never been away from home. Well, he had the 6 amateur fights. He had won them all by knockout. And the promoters decided that they were going to put him on this Charlie Shipes card. Charlie Shipes was managed and trained by a very knowledgeable boxing man from the Oakland area by the name of Dick Sadler. Well, they gave me George's picture, said, "Do you think you can get this in the paper, the Fighting Corpsman?" I said, yes. I took it to the Oakland Tribune. The Oakland Tribune put his picture in the paper. The program opened with the amateur bout, 3 rounds, between George Foreman and a young man who had fought in international amateur events and was a very, very experienced amateur fighter and a very clever boxer. Well, George comes out in the first round and goes for the knockout, non-stop throwing punches. But his opponent knew how to defend himself, and did. And at the end of round 1, which George won on the scorecards, George was out of gas. Well, now it's round 2 and round 3, and the young man, who I can't recall his name now, boxes George's ears off. It's the easiest fight in the world to score. 2 rounds to 1, George Foreman loses. Well, now I, as the ring announcer, have to make a very unpopular announcement to the crowd. And that is, according to the Boxing Commission rules, when you have amateurs and professionals, you have to separate them by at least 20 minutes. So we will now have a 20-minute intermission. Well, this was after watching 3 rounds. Here's a 20-minute intermission. I was roundly booed. So I didn't want to hang around the ring, being as unpopular as I was from that announcement. I walked back to the dressing room. And here, sitting in one of the dressing rooms, all by himself, without any handlers, without any cornermen, is 18-year-old George Foreman. And his chin was literally on his chest. And I could see how sad he was. and it went right into my heart. And I walked over and I patted him on the shoulder and I said, "Don't worry about it, George. You're going to be a good fighter someday. Stick with it." George later wrote in his autobiography, By George, which is a New York Times bestseller, and he wrote in his autobiography, this celebrity by the name of Bill Caplan, who I'll talk more about later in the book, he came back to the dressing room and encouraged me to continue. I was going to quit boxing, and this celebrity encouraged me to continue, and I did. Told me about Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson, who had lost fights and had the greatest of careers. Well, 1974, I read that book. This was from his experience in 1968. 1974, I read the book, and George was he was a HBO color announcer on fights for 12 years. He was part of the team. And he was doing a HBO fight in Sacramento. I caught a plane up to Sacramento, got a room down the hall from George's suite, picked up the phone. I said, "George, it's Bill. I'm down the hall. I want to talk to you." He said, "Sure, come on down." I go down to his suite, knock on the door. Here George opens the door, and he's wearing a bathrobe and slippers, those kind of slippers that have no heel, and the kind of robe that my father used to wear. And there was just an irony to that. He says, "Come on in and sit down." I said, "George, I just read your book, By George." I said, "It's really good. The guy you got to write it did a terrific job, and I can see why it's a bestseller, because it's got great stories." I said, "But I want to ask you something. That night that we met, when I said, 'Don't quit, George, you're going to be a great fighter someday,' and you said this celebrity, Bill Caplan, talked you into it," I said, "Why in the world would you call me a celebrity? I'm anything but a celebrity, George." He says, "I'll tell you why." He says, "First of all, you were wearing a tuxedo." Remember, I was the ring announcer. "And then you were pointing your finger and telling everybody where to go and what to do. And the other thing is, I thought you owned the building." I said, "George, it's the municipal auditorium, the Oakland Municipal Auditorium." I said, "That means it's owned by Oakland." He said, "Yeah, but Bill, I understand all of that now." He said, "But," he says, "I was 18 years old and fresh out of Houston, and what did I know? I didn't know anything." And he says, "I barely knew how to spell my name." I said, "Now I understand." And that's the night I met George Foreman. 1987, when he made his comeback at the fight in Sacramento, and I'm the ring announcer. And I said, "In this corner, the former Olympic gold medalist from the 1968 Olympics, the former undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, making his comeback fight after a 10-year absence, Big George Foreman." And as I was making that announcement, did you ever watch The Twilight Zone? I mean, he's been away for 10 years, and I thought I was in the Twilight Zone. I was listening to my voice, and it was the most eerie thing when I'm announcing George Foreman returned to boxing after being away for 10 years. George and I used to see each other during that 10 years. We had become close friends. He became an ordained minister during those 10 years. And as a matter of fact, performed 3 family weddings for my family. My wife and I, Sandy, when we renewed our vows. So we've been very, very close. We remain close.